I'm Matt Landau, and this is Unlocked, Season 12, Unlimited Edition, the case for more creativity in our businesses. This episode is a very special one for me. It features Paul Waldschmidt, who's the co-founder and CEO of OwnerRez, which is the sponsor of this season, and I'll get to that in just a moment. They're actually kind of the reason why I decided to do this season. It all started last year when Paul attended one of our Keystone retreats, and we started talking and thinking very differently about culture within his organization. We started thinking about values and principles, and perhaps the control or rigidity that so many of us entrepreneurs develop over time that eventually tends to get in our way and block our evolution. Eventually, Paul and I had a discussion about his own company retreat that was taking place at the end of the year in the Dominican Republic. And together, we did something pretty remarkable. Up until then, Paul had this employee manual sort of sitting on the shelf unfinished. And after looking through it, we decided to take on the challenge of completing it, but with this element of the unknown being addressed as a team in the Dominican Republic in style. And the conversations that took place over the course of the next few days were so much more meaningful and deep than I think anybody was really expecting, that we came out of it with a whole new layer to what is the culture of this organization and what do we stand for? Why do we do what we do? This was a really enlightening process for Paul, for his team, but also for me, because it also opened my eyes that going to a team and helping them through a discovery process is something that I not only can do really well, but that I really enjoy the challenge of. So in this conversation today, you'll hear a lot about relationships with our teammates, with our partners, with our customers, and how those relationships are really the center of this entire industry, but perhaps they don't get the attention that they deserve. And more importantly, if they are ignored for too long, these holes in relationships can end up sinking us. The whole point of this conversation is to begin talking more about this kind of stuff that, again, doesn't really get the kind of airtime on other vacation rental podcasts that they deserve, but ultimately that sits at the core of the hospitality industry as a whole. After the event in the Dominican Republic, I proposed OwnerRez get in on this season of the Unlocked podcast. The case for more creativity in business is really what we started exploring together in person, so it only made sense that a collaboration was in the works. If you'd like to do a demo with their property management software experts, head over to OwnerRez.com and let them know that you heard me and Paul on the podcast. Something special will happen. All right, here's me and Paul.
So we had, like most companies, we had, started out, and you have a mission statement and you have you have kind of the documents and the paperwork of what your company is about. And I think Chris and I tend to be kind of purposeful about all of that. So if it's something that makes sense or has practical value, we do it. If we don't, it kind of sits on the shelf. And so the team manual, the new employee handbook, whatever you want to call it, kind of sat on the shelf because we were able to do the business operations and build the product and do what mattered to the bottom line, and that kind of didn't. As the years went on, we kind of looked at it and took it off the shelf, and we had philosophies, we called it, things that we would use internally. And we didn't even really think about it from the standpoint of the mantra or the employee handbook or the manual, but we would say things like speed is a feature. We would say things like people first. These were philosophies that we followed in the industry, companies like Wildbit that I admire. And so we had these phrases and these philosophies that we would talk about, but it wasn't really written down. It wasn't in any sort of mature form. And I realized at that wonderful Keystone event, I realized that was a big mistake, and it needed to be written down. It needed to be matured. It needed to be explored. It needed to be built out. It needed to be a collaboration with others in the company, what they thought as well as they started hearing these things. And so, at Keystone, we learned quite a bit as we kind of explored ourselves and the other members there, members of the cohort. And so we kind of stole some of the terminology that you guys were using, principles and values, and really tried to distill down along those same definitions, what OwnerRez, where it came from, what it means, what we wanted for our team in the future, and how we would build culture out of those things. And so I got back from Keystone and I was super excited. In the summer, I called a meeting of the team leads. I think there were 10 or 11, something like that. We have like 8 teams, but then there's some individuals who are important, but not necessarily team leads in the company. And so we kind of circled the wagon. We had this virtual meeting, and I spoke for probably an hour and a half without stopping. And I think it really just kind of poured out of me. I was actually sitting down by my pool, which I felt like an idiot because I'm sitting. There's like a bright sun and umbrella behind me. They're all in their offices working, and I'm just talking, and it felt. I'm just talking. So it poured out, and what I loved is I started realizing after a while, I'm talking for a while, and I'm really kind of these people who are used to just functional business operations are hearing all this new stuff about culture, stuff about the team manual that other than Chris and Ken and a couple others had no idea even existed from years ago. But I started noticing they were like taking notes, scribbling things down and shaking their heads a lot, and they were smiling. And I started realizing like this is really setting in. It was doing for them what Keystone had done for me. And it was just awesome. And we got to the end and we started talking about we needed to publish that manual. They wanted to kind of read those first few pages that we get started on. And then predictably, we got into the summer and we got into product releases and we got into conferences and everything else. And the manual sat still on the shelf, still not complete, a page or two further than in years past, but still not out and accessible.
I think, first of all, it's so interesting how the energy of a leader, whether it's excited and just, I'm ready to share with you my excitement for an hour and a half, just rambling. It's incredible how that energy affects other people around. And that excitement is a very good thing. Even if you were just completely babbling nonsense, they can feel that excitement and they're like, okay, we're excited too. Whereas I think a lot of people at some point or another find themselves in situations where the excitement is not there, or there's extra stress in one's life, or like things are really just not where you want them to be. And that energy oozes too.
It does. It absolutely does. I think this is why in-person connections, just can't be replaced. Maybe they will be. I love, how tech has always evolved, and I can never say never, but there was a New York Times daily podcast that was talking about this. I was listening to actually this morning about how hybrid work, how it's worked and how it hasn't. And one of the reasons is because the in-person connections of how leaders can get across passion with facial expressions and volume and energy, and being in person at a cubicle or at a desk or across a meeting table is just so combustive, is so exciting and passionate, and it's very hard to do that on Slack or email or something else. So absolutely, yeah, leaders who talk and who get buy-in in person, and I guess you can do that through a screen like this, but those kind of connections, I mean, you could almost, there's just a total difference in passion and in connection between saying it and seeing the look on the person's face who's saying it than in reading it. I mean, imagine I've written that down, how long it would be, an hour and a half of talking, and the difference it would have been.
And I think almost the vibe with which you're delivering it matters more than what it is. And that's like really the perfect segue into towards the end of the year when we had a conversation and you shared with me how you were putting together this first company retreat in the Dominican Republic. You said you had rented out a beautiful 5-star resort and you were going to be flying all of your team members plus a guest into Punta Cana. And we started talking about what could make that very precious experience to celebrate your 10-year anniversary, I would learn later, with a team of hybrid workers, with basically a virtual team, a remote team, how you could make the most of that time together. And we kind of came up with this idea of finishing the team manual by way of this time together. And I'm curious if you can share first how you were feeling upon arriving to Punta Cana to see all these people, in some cases for the first time in person, but also as a leader and the pressure here, the responsibility here for you to, you got to deliver.
Yeah, it was spectacular. It was surreal. It's like a dream that I still kind of realize. We did our media department did a post the other day, memorializing the 10-year anniversary, and then a company retreat page showing photos and everything publicly. And once again, reading it and helping finish that out, it just felt kind of like a dream that we realized in real life. Just to get to that point, Chris and I had talked about that years ago. Other companies we admired had done that. Sometimes they had done it. They do it every year. Sometimes it's every couple of years. But to get everyone together to create and build that culture, which again comes back to the team manual that was never finished. We kind of knew that being in person, talking, connecting, we needed to do all of this. So when we arrived at Punta Cana, we had some staff members here, did such a fantastic job. I feel like I didn't do any work all week. Like I did nothing. I talked to you and I talked to the team and I was around and whatever, asked my opinion on different things. But I felt like I did nothing. It just worked. And it was because of the hard work of some of the people here who put it together. But yeah, so I was thinking about, is this just a vacation for everyone on the team and their partner? Or can this be more? And I didn't like either answer because I didn't want it to be all work and trust fall exercises all day. But I didn't also want it to be everyone comes here and then goes on their separate ways and is out on excursions. And maybe you run into somebody and maybe you don't. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to memorialize in person what we had done, to talk about things that I didn't even know what we wanted to talk about, but to talk about things. And so that's when I forget why you and I connected. Maybe it was at Verma or something earlier in the year, but when it came out that we were doing this, I was kind of like, man, maybe Matt can give me some training or some ideas on the side, because, what happened at Keystone was just so, transformative, was such a spectacular moment that, if we could bring some of that to this trip, then wow. So, and then obviously it worked out that, you were willing to come along and kind of guide those sessions and kind of, be part of that. And so that's kind of how it all came together. And I'm really glad that you were able to come along.
When we first chatted and you asked for some tips, it was really hard for me to just give tips, because the discovery process of first conceptualizing what Keystone would be, hosting them, learning what works and what doesn't, is much more of like almost like an art that is very hard to just say, do this, do this, do this. And it almost feels like silly to say, well, you're going to need, 40 chairs in a circle. That it matters so much less than the vibe and the purpose behind it. And that was for me an incredible exciting conversation, because here I am experimenting with this new Keystone format. And somebody, yourself, who had attended a retreat says, hey, what would you think about helping out with the retreat for our team? And for me, that was like, oh my gosh, I could totally do this. I could do this and I would love it and it would be challenging. Let's go. And entering into that first morning session together with the team in Punta Cana, I was very unsure, frankly, about what was about to happen. I knew the energy and the vibe are really important. I knew the room needed to be quiet, we needed to have water, but I didn't know how you would bring yourself. And I certainly didn't know where we would go with the conversation. And I was hoping you could share this story that you shared with your team for the first time ever that was, by all accounts, I think changed the way that your own team now understands the company. And it happened to include your wife, who was sitting just a few rows away.
Yeah, it was huge, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And I don't think, it's one of the many things that I thank you for, because I don't think that would have happened without kind of your guidance and you being there. I don't think that moment would. I don't think I appreciated that part of our story as much, or at least I don't think that others would have cared as much about that story. So the impact that I had was just really remarkable. So you were talking about milestones in the company and looking back, and I think I had mentioned to you casually, like by the pool the day before or something that you wanted to explore more, and I didn't realize you were going to explore it on that first day. But looking back at the milestones of OwnerRez, there's obviously the very beginning, the cabin and software and all of that, and of course there's milestones later on in the process, like when Chris and I came together in 2013, and the pricing increase of 2017, or the pricing adjustment of 2017. So those milestones were there, but there was one you asked me to talk about that I never realized was as important as it is, and it's in 2012, and that was after almost 6 years of me building OwnerRez on my own. The original old OwnerRez, it was actually called Owner Reservations back then. Terrible name, very long domain name and everything else. I was like trying to target SEO for domains or something. And I had labored for a while. I was working a regular job and to, support my family while doing this idea on the side. This was, pre Airbnb entirely. This is, the days when Vrbo is still kind of a Craigslist, directory of links. And we're still, even though it sounds fairly recent, it's a long time ago in the VR years. And I had labored and it wasn't working. I had, after years and years, I had, a few customers, like 50 customers, of which, maybe 30 weren't paying the bills. And it was all like usage pricing and just mostly built for my wife and I in our cabins. And I didn't really know what was wrong. I didn't know really which direction to go. And I was building things for a bunch of different individual people and sorting out how eventually you could do channel management and things like this years before that term kind of solidified in the industry. And I wrote my wife kind of this is the end of the line. I've gone this far. It's like other businesses that we started and then, after a few years haven't worked, and I'm going to turn it off. Like, it's just gone on long enough. And I was dejected, not really emotional, just kind of into the line. Kind of presented the case to her. This is end of the line. So it was the end of the line for what I thought OwnerRez could do, or what I could do for it. It was a failed business model, I thought, at that point. I just couldn't give any more, time. And I still have the text message. My wife wrote me back a couple of paragraphs in which she said that she believed in me and that I was wrong to stop. Other businesses, yes, but not this one. That even though I was basically treading water for 5 or 6 years, in many ways, not just financially, but in building new things that weren't being adopted, that she saw the industry. She saw what was going on. She believed in the industry. She believed in me. She believed in the use of it. She used it herself. And then I needed to just kind of stop and sit back and evolve and change and think about the whole process at large, but that I was wrong, and that, this was the future, and that she believed in it, and she didn't think I should quit. And if you know where my wife was at that point, Katie this was summer of 2012. We had 2 little ones and a newborn. So 3 little ones, but one was just born, my third son, Isaac. And she had every reason to say, yeah, let's be done with this. I was working a lot. She was just helping with 1,000 things. She had, again, 2 babies and a toddler, essentially. And she didn't even have to say no. She could have just ridden my own despair and saying it's the end of the line and gone, well, you tried your best, and move on. But she didn't. She believed in it. And so, when I look back at the time, I don't think I realized the gravity of that moment. I certainly didn't. And in the years since, I really didn't. I took her advice, and I, kind of sat back a little bit and thought about the process at large, thought about what I needed, which evolved into the next January 2013, me calling an old friend, Chris, and starting anew with kind of the new OwnerRez. But later on, I remembered the text. I found it. I took a screenshot of it, and I have it saved. And every so often I look at that, because as I told our team in Punta Cana, none of this 10 years later, 7,000 customers, we've processed over $1 billion in bookings, 40 some team members, the Punta Cana trip, none of this would be here without that moment. So that, when I told them that, the proverbial, you could hear a pin drop. And I broke down looking, I was looking at the whole room, and the pressure of them all looking at me, my wife being 15 feet away. I couldn't get those words out. I think I've elaborated here a lot more than I did then. I could not physically say everything I just said, because the emotion of seeing all their faces and knowing how OwnerRez has helped and touched their lives. Thinking again about the gravity of where Katie was when she wrote that text message. So it was a very, very hard moment. But yeah, I heard from that point forward, I heard a lot from team members about how much they cared about sharing that. So, kind of the milestone I never really thought of that should have always been right there in the manual.
We mentioned that the team or employee manual was still incomplete leading up to the retreat, and that we had kind of thrown out the idea of using the team retreat to complete it, at least a first version that could be shared. And on that final day, for me, it was this much bigger, softer sort of magic about OwnerRez that didn't exist in the first, 3/4 of the manual. And frankly, it's just quite difficult to put into words. It's not values and principles. It's like a special feeling that's very different. It's a feeling. How did you then take a look at that point, incomplete team manual?
It being kind of not really a manual. It's kind of, I don't know what the term is, but like a living document of the company evolving over time. Because what we've realized is that these principles and values, as much as they stay bedrock and they're fundamental and they underpin, how we conduct ourselves, there's also things we start discovering that we want to add. There's also definitions we want to put in there. What does one touch solve mean now that we've learned in the last year since writing down one touch solve? Manager of one, something we've said a lot recently. What does that mean in 2024 differently than 2023? So my goal is to, in the first quarter here of 2024, get out the first, episode in the series, so to speak, the first round of what it is, and then have regular contribution from the team of what to tweak, what to add. Not that everyone will just be piling in paragraphs of stuff, but thoughts on a regular basis. Also, using meetings during the week, at least our all hands meeting, to bring up other things in people's lives, to keep those connections, that feeling that you're talking about. That feeling, again, like the New York Times podcast, without an in-person, and I'm using the screen too as in-person, but without that ability to talk and see facial expression, to hear anecdote, to emotionally connect, to empathize, you can't have that feeling. I don't know that it can be written. I don't know that anyone is, so eloquent or so well, can write so well that they can express that same feeling. So using our all hands meeting, instead of just running around and saying, what did you do, and obstacles and, these functional things, but to talk about challenges in their life that week. And then the next week, talk about new goals and things. So we have at every all hands meeting since that point, every week, we tell people 24 to 48 hours before the all hands meeting, here's the topic. If you don't have something, it's fine. It's optional. But think about in your life, this particular topic, and, try and distill it down to 30 or 45 seconds or a minute. And people routinely go 2-3 minutes. But in talking about, something positive, something negative, I mean, there are times where the topic skews a little negative. Obstacles or things you've dealt with personally or business-wise lately that are holding you back. It can be hard for that not to be 40 people all talking about negativity and putting a positive spin on it. But it's the living side of the manual. It's how we breathe life together in a human way into this manual week by week by week.
You, I think, went some places at that retreat with your own leadership of your team that you hadn't before, and that you were nervous about, and that you delivered in extraordinary ways, I felt. How have you, as the leader of a company with great momentum, with great principles and values, with a fantastic team, where everything is working smoothly, and maybe not smoothly, but it's growing in the organic way that you want it to grow, how have you personally begun thinking about development or growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's made me try and look past hard, rigid lines that I've had that I thought were there to help build company culture, build profitability, build organic growth, not get so hung up on them. We'll never have another owner or that kind of thing. It is Chris and I forever. That those type of rigid lines, and not that that's on the horizon right now, but having that type of rigid mindset on it needs to be led by me, because I have this altruistic view, or I'm empathetic to employees, or I love this culture that's been created. First of all, it's a living team manual. So it's a team. Teams come and go. The succession of any business. I think you asked about this. Someone did at Keystone. They said, well, everything's going great and that's wonderful. So what's going to happen when you get older or retire or don't want to do this anymore? How do you keep this going? And it completely stunned me, just completely stopped me in my tracks. Because I was focused on, I think our visual at the Legos, I was focused on like the wheel going around the mill. And I was like, just keeping this running and, keeping that happiness going and thriving as a company. And then I thought, wow, you're right. It's not like an auto mechanic shop or something you just hand to your kids, right? It's kind of an online thing. It's, I've got a partner and I want my kids to do whatever makes them happy. So what does the future look like when you've gone 10 years, you've grown, you're at where you want to be? You need to, some of these rigid things in your mind, you need to be okay with those evolving as well. Whatever the succession of OwnerRez is, whatever the next 5 or 10 years look like, you need to be fine personally with that, as long as the principles and the culture remain. So work on principles and culture. Work on, weeding the garden. I used that when I was there doing some teamwork at Punta Cana. My word was a gardener. Try and keep the garden green, keep the flowers blooming, keep the weeds out. Don't look at it only being me that can do the gardening. Others can garden. So those are some of the walls, the limits that I've looked at within myself. It also helps just generally looking at the team the same way. You can't hang on to every single person that's here because, you liked them a year ago, or that this was the right place for them a year ago. People are going to come and go. It has to be the living manual of the team. The culture has to be able to thrive as people exit and enter. The last thing I'll mention, I was recently talking to my team about hiring. I think one of our all hands meetings, the topic was, something that has changed in your mind recently. And one of the things that I've realized is you can't suss out who is going to be a good employee and who isn't really ahead of time. You can't only put up walls for testing or looking at resumes or work history. You can't just ask the right questions, the perfect questions, and guarantee that this person more and more and more. Our process is going to find the right person, and you'll have higher and higher success rates. You have to be fine with sometimes hiring the wrong person, doing the best you can, but hiring the wrong person. Sometimes you hire the right person and then the job's no longer right for them because of their own personal life or because of the job itself in 6 months or a year, because people change. So be less rigid with myself, be less rigid with team and who we want to hire and these kind of constructs, and more about the culture and the principles and that sort of living team manual with whoever is here.
The value and the importance of space away from the cauldron, taking time away, kind of back to where we began the conversation, finding ways to not be distracted at all hours of the day. Gaining that perspective for me, and then being able to jump right back in if I need to. But gaining that perspective for me is a very hard thing, because it's my instinct. I mean, heck, it's my salary is at stake. I got to show up, go to work, do a great job, go the extra mile, come up with new ideas. But it is the opposite of that, the step away and just maybe going for a long walk or taking a weekday off if I can and just hanging out at the beach. That I have found to be a new kind of value in my life. Absolutely.
And actually I'm glad you brought that up. You touched on something that Chris and I don't want to reveal too much about Chris without him being here, but he's mentioned, and I think he's pretty much made it public, but anyone who knows Chris, my partner, knows that, he is a 70-hour a week, head down, the word nerd just seems to be an understatement, but like he's, and if you look at him, you don't see nerd. He's this big, muscular guy, but he has been the long pole in the tent for a few years now. Back in the day, we were both engineers. We both worked long hours. And then it transitioned to him when I got into more operations as CEO, and I eventually shut down and all my coding, and I haven't done anything in years. And maybe, of course, we built out. We have an engineering team, everything else. He recently has taken a big step in basically not doing any more code himself, which I actually thought would never happen. He's just such a force for excellence in engineering, and just prolific coder, and mentor so many people. It was funny at the event how he wanted to talk about being a mentor and how that wanting to be a new step for him. And there were like 3 guys who all looked at each other from an engineering team and put their hand up and said, "Chris, you already have been my mentor. Like, you don't realize this, like how much mentoring you've done." And he does all day, all the time, constantly talking to them about little things, not just instructional with code, but about patterns and design and, things that actually get kind of very cool. Even a non-coder from the outside would really love to hear. So he has this wonderful mind, this wonderful mentor's mind, and never really realized that he's already doing that, but now is purposefully starting to do that. And then getting back to me, me kind of bringing some of that in my own life, like extending some of that in my own life, the days away, so that you're refreshed and you can get vision. And I'm pursuing mentorship myself, to, keep this alive, to keep the energy alive, the new thoughts alive. Not that they're not there already, but when you're in the middle of it, and when you're looking at reports and you're in meetings and you're doing all this stuff, you just can't, you can't have that Punta Cana fresh energy that kind of floods in. You go, oh yeah, right. This is more important. This is the thing. This is the guidance that these team leads need. So he and I together, I think, are walking more down that road. And that is a real big change that came out of Punta Cana for sure.
And what's so interesting about that as well is that, for you, he could never do anything other than coding, right? Which kind of sounds like a brother or a father type, because that's who you are. This is how I've always known you. But for Chris, it's like, no, that I don't enjoy the coding as much now as I did then, or I enjoy this new kind of growth much more now than I enjoy coding. And I think that is the beauty of the relationship there, is that when Chris did share this, it's received in a way like, wow, yes, let's roll.
Yeah, I mentioned it. That's exactly right. I cut two things there. So I mentioned that to him when we were Punta Cana in person. Chris and I have, obviously been in, but we grew up in the same area. And so we've been in person much of our lives, but in the last decade, a lot less so. He's in Arizona, I'm in Virginia. And so we're not that close together anymore physically. We do see each other a couple times a year at conferences and whatnot. But in Punta Cana, there was a moment where we were sitting and talking, and I just mentioned, man, yeah, I just can't believe how much over the years lately you've really been this, long pole in the tent, and it's really appreciated. And for me, it was almost a throwaway comment. Not that I didn't mean it, but it didn't mean that much. And he, hopefully he doesn't hear this and get upset, but he broke down, and he just, could barely get the words out, but he was like, man, I really appreciate that. And it's really good hearing that. And I realized again, it was like the Katie text message, like, oh, wow, I have not, there's a hole here. There's an area in our relationship and in the business that has not been focused on like it should be. And then right into your point, yeah, he's been my safety blanket, my security blanket, right? He's been well, Chris has got that covered because he always does, right? And so there's been some, I never really had any doubt about it, but watching him kind of mentor and hand off some of the sysops and some of the on-call stuff and some of the high level, the stuff where we watch security and networking and stuff in the background, hand off some of that to some other guys. It's been great. It's also been a little bit, not awkward, but a little scary, maybe I would say, for me, because now instead of just trusting Chris, I'm trusting like the team he's put together, which they're phenomenal guys. It's a great process. Things are documented, things are working well, and of course, it's all for the benefit of, spreading out the risk and everything else that they do. But it has been kind of eye-opening that, yeah, as you said, I've kind of looked at him like, you're the guy who takes care of stuff, and that's kind of your role, and you're awesome at it, but that's your role. And on his side, he's going, no, I need more than that. I want to do these other things, which he's already doing, and he's so good at. And so that, yeah, it never realized it was going on in my mind and in his mind. And now there's, I think, clarity coming out of that.
And I think for him, that took a lot of courage. That was a theme of our conversations as well. The courage to share that, because, who knows how his partner might respond. But also when you feel that you're ready for a change and you've put a finger on it and you've decided really you want to explore a new world, and you share that with somebody and that person responds in a way that's like, let's do that. Let us support you doing that. That's when you know you have a great kind of trust and relationship with that person, I believe, as opposed to those who would prefer to keep you in those previous positions. And for me, that was really the theme of our entire time together with the group. It was that level of trust that was built and the willingness to share some of that stuff, which definitely took a lot of courage. That answered our question, what's the future of the industry look like? What is the future of OwnerRez as a market leader? Like, it wasn't a bullet list item the way that we maybe would have thought in the past, but it was everything somehow.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And I think you're right that you're bringing back bits and pieces with Econo. So thank you for that. And you're right. Cause it's not just me going, oh yeah, I really want you to do that for Chris, realizing what I've done and what I've experienced in evolving and wanting that for him, but really everyone. I recall you and I talking about a potential question that you might ask, or maybe hypothetical or something that you weren't going to ask, but you wondered about, which is if everyone in the team, 40 people, and maybe I was gone or something, so it wasn't awkward, and you asked them all like, hey, if you got $1 million and you did not need to work for OwnerRez, would you?
Quick answer before Paul gets back.
Yeah, I'm ready. And my response was then and is now, I would hope that they not work for OwnerRez. I mean, Chris and I would be different. We have that, a little bit more, vested interest, and this is kind of our baby and that kind of thing. But for most staff members, there's a lot of people who are passionate about what we do. Like I said, vacation rentals and that kind of thing. But if you had, unlimited funds and you could live anywhere in the world and do whatever, I would really want you to go do that, to go do whatever that thing is in your mind, to start that business or whatever else. And if you wanted to hang out with us and answer support tickets and work on the code, well, that's cool. But that was really transformative too, because it made me realize that, again, getting back to the, what's that song or whatever about, like, to keep the girl, you have to let her go or whatever. Like, don't try and hang on to people to foster relationships and connect. It's about the culture and the connection of whoever is on the team, not just individuals you're hanging on to. It would be wonderful if they were in that situation and could use those funds and do what they wanted. So that was remarkable, and that's all part of it.
I decided to call this episode Conway's Law, which I only learned recently was coined in 1968, and it basically says that the values, the personality, the style of a founder of a software company permeates throughout the development team, and that ultimately impacts palpably the customer experience. And that alone was a pretty huge thing for me to process, that the vibes of a founder at any given moment can impact directly the people who are using the product or service. The follow-up was naturally, well, what happens if there's a blockage with the founder? What happens if the founder is really stressed? And I think something that Paul demonstrates very courageously is that things are changing, and there is no way to predict for so much of these changes that are happening. And ultimately, it's our job as good leaders to step into those changes, to address those holes in the relationship, as Paul put it, to enhance our awareness, and ultimately that willingness, that vulnerability, that courage, that curiosity, that translates to your team. And I got to experience this firsthand. The team from OwnerRez, upon hearing Paul's story, suddenly met him at that wavelength, and incredible discussions ensued. I know that upon leaving that retreat with the OwnerRez team, every customer that comes in contact with them will feel that too. So this is just a really nice reminder to trace all the change you want to see within your organization, within our industry, in your life, back to yourself, asking, what do you really want? How can you be even clearer with your vision? How can you lead your relationships more honestly, more courageously? These are questions I think that define the future of vacation rentals. And I cannot thank Paul enough for the conversation here, but also for the spark of an idea to focus this entire season around this creative discovery. So if you'd like to sign up for a demo, I know by comparison this seems kind of transactional, but if you'd like to explore what OwnerRez offers, head over to OwnerRez.com. And if you'd like to discuss what a private gathering or workshop or retreat might look like for your team, feel free to reach out to me. My email is matt@vrmb.com. Until next time.